Welcome to episode number 6 of The Rabbi and The Shrink. And we're here to talk about everyday ethics, and today's topic is limit setting. Rabbi, why don't you get us started? Tell us about limit setting.
Well, I'm going to switch into heavy-duty rabbinic philosopher mode at the risk of scaring everyone away. King Solomon in the book of Proverbs says, don't remove the boundaries of eternity that were set in place by your ancestors. And what Solomon's telling us is that there are conventions that guide society. There are rules of conduct. And while it's true that society evolves, it changes, people change, culture changes, but to toss out wholesale those conventions that have guided human civilization throughout the ages is a very risky business. But there's a reason why people have done things the way they've done them. And yes, we have to re-examine those boundaries and those rules in every generation, in every place, in every culture, right? If you go too far to one side, you become calcified, you become dogmatic, and you start giving value to things that they don't necessarily have intrinsically. But if you err on the other direction, then you end up with chaos, you end up with anarchy. And one of the most fascinating applications I've seen of this is that Albert Einstein, decades after he came up with the theory of relativity, he expressed concern to the level of regret, because he said that he saw what was happening in the world, that once people understood and recognized that the physical laws of the universe they could be changed, they were variable, they were relative. He said it was a short step from there to moral relativism, to the abandonment of the absolute values that had guided civilization for so long. And he actually regretted that he had contributed to this movement of moral relativism. So, like everything else that we talk about in ethics, it's all about the gray areas. It's about balancing a commitment and a respect for the past with a forward-looking flexibility towards the future. And that applies in every aspect of our lives, our basic guide to life. And in our interactions with people, we have to be open to accommodating others, but we also have to be able to set limits so that we look after ourselves and we don't enable others to take advantage of us.
I think that's incredibly well said. As a psychologist, one thing we know is that all of life is how we set limits. What are the limits we set with what we think is reasonable for ourselves and others? A lot of it has to do with values, and some of it has to do with self-control. How do we set limits? Last time we were talking about cancel culture, which is the lack of a limit. If we're not going to listen, we're going to do this. When we were kids, we go, I'm not listening. And that would be the limit, saying we can't tolerate what you're saying, you're canceled. And today we're talking about more nuanced setting of limits. So, Rabbi, why is it that so many people have a hard time, from your point of view, and then we'll talk about mine, in terms of just setting reasonable limits?
Well, it's, this is a common refrain that we have, and I think it will continue to be, that we want to, certainly life is a lot easier when everything's black and white.
It is.
It's just simpler. We don't have to think. And because human beings are essentially lazy creatures, we try to avoid thinking if we can. We making difficult decisions, grappling with intangibles. It's tiring, and especially in our age, when we seem to be bombarded with choices every moment. They say Steve Jobs would always wear a black turtleneck and jeans. And that was his whole closet, because he wanted to eliminate unnecessary decisions from his life so they could focus on the things that were really important. Well, if we go overboard that way, then we aren't really living. We're not really engaging people the way we should. So on the one hand, we said this already, right? We want to leave ourselves open to help others, to be there for others, to accommodate others. Somebody calls me with a problem. I need to talk to you. I need help. Can you give me a hand? We want to respond because we want to be good people, we want to think of ourselves as helpful people. On the other hand, if we overextend ourselves, then we're no good to ourselves or anybody else. So we tend to find some default that's comfortable for us and just stay there. And we may end up either setting that default too far to one side or too far to the other.
That's entirely true. I was watching somebody parent the last time I went to the grocery store, and I could see them struggling with the limit of something as basic of putting on your mask, right? And the child was 10, old enough to know better, and was playing with a mask on and off, on and off, on and off, on and off, like a game. And the mother said nothing. So the one thing I know is that setting limits takes a lot of energy, and you have to know that you're not going to myrtleize somebody. Like the Three Stooges. You don't want to myrtleize someone because you can't stand their response when they say no to the limit you set. So I think a lot of times we don't set a limit, especially when there's an audience, because we don't want to have to handle the ambiguity and the possible repercussions of our limit not being honored. And how we make limits. So psychologically speaking, there are commands, demands, and requests. A request is confusing because we are often in a polite or passive society. Could you please put on your mask? Well, it's not really a request, because requests have to be, so you can say yes or no, and both are okay. But is it okay for a child not to have a mask on in public these days? No, it is not okay. It's just not safe. It's not a moral value. It's not a judgment. Right now, it's a law. But beyond that, we don't want our babies to get sick or to get someone else sick. It's just the way it is. It gets less complicated once we have the rules in place, because then our value is not so much in question. And then there's the issue of an agreement, which is a command that, a demand that you say, in our family, we follow these rules. They don't have to make sense, but in the grocery store, whether you agree or not, we're wearing our masks. So you make agreements that we're going to follow these rules, whether it's a spiritual rule, a commandment, whether someone deserves death or not, we don't kill them. That's just kind of in our family. That's what we do. When you're grown up, you can make your own rules, but this is how it is now. So it's just kind of funny to think that. And then, so that's where most parents fail. They have a demand, and then they make it a request. And then the other one is a command. A kid's running into the street, go stop. And that is, strictly speaking, the only time that it really is effective and useful to yell, because it's immediate. You're saving a life. They're about to put the fork in the toaster. Stop. No. Or you smack their hand a little bit because they're not paying attention and they're going to get hurt, whatever. I've seen parents get upset that they had to smack a kid. And I'm thinking, if they're not paying attention, you have to grab the hand out to be safe. So the big problem is that parents go, and many of us go from a request that isn't a request, but really an agreement that we believe is established, all the way to yelling and screaming. They forget that there's that whole world of agreements where you have to have some authority. People have to respect you. You have to take a risk that you're going to communicate. All right. So that's a long way of saying that I think that's part of why people bounce from one end to another. Rabbi?
Well, I think you make a really insightful point, which is why I'm delighted that we're partners, because you make insightful points of bringing the whole relationship with children into this. Because with children, we recognize that we are responsible for the children. And therefore, since we are responsible, their behavior reflects on us. So this is where it gets really complicated. And I can say this from a point of authority that all my children are grown up and out of the house, so I have no responsibility anymore, which is liberating. But when you're in the grocery store aisle and your child is not behaving the way you want them to as a parent, then you're caught between these two competing problems. I'm embarrassed by my child acting this way. I don't want to embarrass myself by responding in a way that makes me look bad. So now I'm torn between two different ways that I may look bad. One of my neighbors was in the grocery store, and he and his wife with their kids, and their kids were having a meltdown. And he said to his wife, "I am never bringing the neighbor's kids to the store again." Well,
That's funny. When we were misbehaving, my father would say to my mother, "Ay, beba, we've been in America too long." Like blaming it on America when really it was us.
yeah,
They were teasing. I mean, they
yeah,
thought it was very funny to.
it really extends beyond our own children. As members of society, we sometimes grapple with when to uh, project a sense of responsibility for others. Right? My wife is, we've talked about this, my wife is a little militant when it comes to people wearing masks. And she will confront people in public places and ask them. And that's a very tricky business, because who are you to tell me what to do? Well, the answer really is simple. I'm a member of society, and I want my health protected. I want everybody else's health protected, and you are not demonstrating civic responsibility. But of course, it has a lot more to do with how we say it than what we're saying, to try and respect the limits of someone else's personal autonomy while asking them to respect the limits of social responsibility.
Yeah. One of my friends is a funny prankster, and he takes things sometimes too far. And he'll say, he'll get really close to somebody with his mask, someone who's not wearing a mask, and he'll say, "I'm sorry, I have AIDS. Please put on your mask. I don't want to get you sick." The truth is, he does have AIDS, so he's not lying, but he's using that. And I'm telling you, you're not 6 feet away. So, at what cost do we make a point? I've told him repeatedly, I don't think that's a smart choice. He at this point is kind of militant and angry when people aren't protecting him or others. And yet, we had a woman on one of our shows who did not wear her mask. She did wear it when it was required. She did her civic duty, but otherwise did not. And I think that the issue of limits is, how do we decide what limit works for us, as opposed, and do we ask ourselves, is it just that it's convenient? Is it that we are fighting the rules? Because it's always fun to break a rule, right? So how do we decide what are the limits we set for ourselves? How much do we watch TV? How much of the news do we watch? Do we torture ourselves with every moment? When do we sleep? When do we eat? What do we eat? There are limits everywhere.
Yeah, and you mentioned getting angry, getting militant. That is always going to cloud our judgment. I know today it's no longer acceptable to strike one's children, and perhaps that's for the best. But in days when it was acceptable, the rule of parenting was never hit when you're mad, because then you're hitting for you as opposed to hitting in a way that's meant to be instructive to the child. So when we respond to people we believe they're violating our boundaries, go back to my California roots, invading our space, somehow not showing us the respect that we deserve for one reason or another, and we react emotionally, that's when the interaction is likely to escalate and not end up being productive. But the Talmud says, the sages teach that what is the proper way that a person should conduct himself or herself? It's by acting in a way that is respectful and earns them respect from others. And I've always found that a very intriguing expression, because our natural inclination, I think, is to conflate those two. But there is an idea of self-respect. How should I act, not because somebody else is watching, but simply because I'm living up to my own code and my own standards? But what if my code and my standards is not perfectly aligned with the expectations of society? I still have to strike a balance. If I've decided for whatever reason that I don't want to wear a mask, I still have to appreciate that I'm living in a society that has laws, and that has, beyond laws, has what's considered proper social conduct. And if the expectations placed on me would allow me to get away with behavior that personally is not dignified, I need to be able to know when to expect more from myself, even if society is going to give me a pass.
And I think sometimes, back to the issue of anger, speaking of a pass, I think it's gotten to be more commonly accepted that we see people going on tirades, not so much in person, but in groups, on social media. We become, like I've said before, the keyboard warriors. And I love that term. I didn't make it up, but I love that term. What is our value? If someone's on a tirade on social media, that's certainly very different than someone yelling and screaming in the grocery store about not wearing a mask. Especially since in the grocery store, you can always ask the manager to address the issue, not you. I always say, masks are sexy. And maybe it doesn't work for rabbis, I don't know, but masks are sexy, and they'll laugh at me and then they'll put it on. I don't like having to be the police, especially if it's not my job. And yet so many times we certainly have to feel like, since people are uncomfortable setting limits, even in an airplane, it's very unusual these days for a flight crew to tell someone, please, sir, put your mask on to cover your nose as well. And so I've talked to many of the crews and say, could you please ask everyone to put their masks on so that covers their nose and their mouth? I've had to ask that repeatedly, and I say it nicely. I say, look, I'm old. I have a favor. Could you help me? And they say, sure. People like to be hopeful. And then when I ask that, they'll do it. Now, if I come complaining, like you said, depends on how you say it, they're not going to listen to me. I'll look like a crazy old lady, which is, something I fight regularly. So, to be careful how you present yourself.
Yeah.
So why is this issue of limits so hard? Why do we have such a hard time setting limits? Let's talk about the issue of temper. Why am I uncomfortable telling you that I'm uncomfortable with how you're speaking to me? And why is it somehow easier for me to tell you that I'm more uncomfortable with how you're handling someone else? Or the other way around. Why is one easier or different than the other?
Well, you said before, you don't like being the police. And most of us don't. And if we do, maybe that's a different problem. But we also, I know for myself, I want people to take responsibility for themselves. I don't want to be put in a position where I have to be an authority. So there's always a certain resentment. Why are you acting in a way that's requiring me to intervene? And that itself is a complex issue, because again, we have different values, we have different priorities, we have different standards, we have different understandings of what's expected of us from society. So we want to live in a world of harmony. Why can't we just all get along? Because we're human beings, and we have rough edges, and we have sharp corners, and we bump into each other, and that's life. And managing that is what civilization is all about, what civil society is all about. Also, we don't like being corrected. And so we anticipate that if we correct others, they're going to respond the way we would respond. And I think I've mentioned before that in biblical Hebrew, the word for rebuke shares its root with the word for vindication. If I tell you you need to improve, what I'm really saying is, I believe in you. I believe you can be better than you are. And that should be an empowering statement. Of course, again, it's how it's delivered. And it's how secure we are in ourselves. Because the truth is, most of us get defensive when we're corrected by others.
I'm putting comments, questions for us. Please put them in the chat. So those of you who know we've done these before, this is our number 6. We're talking about limits. And we put a limit on this one this time. Our videographer, Peter Kelly, who's amazing, made a recommendation that it's easier to make a video if it's just the two of us on camera. And so we're trying something new. This is a webinar, so no one's on camera but the two of us. And it's certainly different. I miss seeing people's faces, but we also want to do what makes sense for the biggest impact. So how do you feel? This is a question. How do you feel about the limit we've placed on you by making you faceless and voiceless? Please put in the chat.
That's a really intriguing question, Doctor.
Thanks.
Some people, I think, crave a certain amount of anonymity. You talk about the keyboard warriors. It's a lot easier to rant and rage when there's nobody else in my room except me. And other people want to be recognized, want to be seen, want to have a more visible voice or presence.
And so we have Dave Bricker says he misses the feel of the discussion. I think we have, I miss seeing the others. Yes, me too. I miss the community feel, no limits. Glad to be here learning. That's Joanna. And when I heckle you guys, I like to see people laugh. Dave Bricker, our favorite heckler, storyteller extraordinaire. I generally have my video audio off anyway, so no big deal. Thank you, Clifford. We appreciate that. Joanna's it's funny, I'm allowing myself to multitask more when I usually try to focus on my screen. See, that's one of the things we've been talking about. So when we set a limit, like you're going to be voiceless and faceless, except for through typing, suddenly now we have to put our own limits on ourselves. So I'm the same way. If I know I'm not being monitored, I'm going to multitask. I'm going to be petting the dog. I'm going to be maybe doing some crunches or whatever when I'm watching something. And that's kind of interesting. Joanna, I'm with you. If I don't have to behave, it's hard to sit still and focus on a screen and know that you're being watched the whole time. It takes a lot of effort. So when you relax that, if we're multitasking, I think we pay less attention and maybe we participate less. It can be more fun, however.
And thanks for that comment, Joanna, because if we flip it around the other way, there are times when we should turn ourselves off. I know when I'm giving a presentation and there are people that are eating or on the phone or clearly busy with something else or get up and leave and there's an empty chair there. I mean, those are all distractions as a speaker. When we speak live, there's a certain expectation. People are, they may be looking at their phones under the table, but that's sort of expected these days. But you don't expect people to stand up and walk around and get on their phones and have conversations while there's a live speaker in front of them. So the idea of Zoom etiquette is also an interesting application of limits, that if I'm attending something and I can, sometimes we have to multitask, sometimes we have distractions come along. If I can, to be present by looking present. And if I can't be present, to then conceal my screen so that I'm not projecting a lack of respect or attention to the speaker or the people who are there.
So we have 2 comments. Malcolm, oh, you're a sweetie pie. Malcolm said, I thought I was the only one. I felt bad for you and the rabbi. Thank you. What kind sentiment that was. Joanna says, I love the notion of Zoom etiquette. Yes. Um, and John Tenzer said, Yonason, that that's grappling with the empty chair.
Thank you,
John
John. Glad to
Tenzer,
have you
never
here.
short for a good with a good phrase.
That's actually a that's a concept in reporting the empty chair. It's when the reporter asks a question that the no one's there to answer, and it's also considered unethical. So it's asked to pose a question to the audience after the person being interviewed has already left or is no longer in the room.
It's interesting. So Dave is telling us the default setting is to address comments to panelists only. No, I have it for panelists and attendees. Please put in the chat if you're seeing everything. Are you guys seeing other people's comments or not? Just put yes or no. Just us. Yes, you're seeing other people's comments. Okay. Yeah. 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 I set it up so that everyone could see everyone's comments because I think we can build some community that way. I think
Also, when
it's
you
good.
type in comments and you're in the box, it needs to say to everyone.
Yeah, well, and Dave makes the point everyone has to set up their own. So if you go in the chat and you go to the bottom where it says to, there's a little caret pull down, and you have to say, panelists and anyone. You have to choose that. Each has their own choice, just as you can choose to see things in many meetings. The view of it can change. Back to the issue of an empty chair. I went to a returning warrior workshop in the Navy a few years ago. I used to do a lot of those when I was part of a yellow ribbon speaking cadre, helping with the transitions of war. And they did something that is to this day incredibly moving to me. They put a little round table that set it beautifully with crystals and linens and a rose. I think it was a rose and an empty chair. And the whole idea there was different than what we're talking about this interview, is that it's for the warrior that is gone because he has sacrificed his life for a nation, or they're missing. And some people also say, for those that came back differently, but most people just think it's the issue of the lost warrior. And that's a whole different kind of empty chair, isn't it? And I think many of us, when we're thinking about moving forward, I know when I move forward, since I came to this country as a refugee, I always think about those who sacrificed for our nation, whether they're idealists who were gunned down for making things better, or the police or fire, certainly all of our warriors from all the services. I bring those with me. And I think that, and even as a kid, I remembered I have to behave because they sacrificed for my freedom. I can't do that because I'm free here. And I remember the sense of incredible obligation to that, in a sense, empty chair that I honor as I walk through life. Never realized that I did that, but that's kind of odd, but I do that. So John Tenza, lots of empty chairs in families today because of the political divide in the air right now. Woof, big comment. So John and I were having a discussion the other day that with all that's been happening in the United States of America with politics, there are many people who are at odds and don't know what to do with each other. They voted this way or that way. They support this or that. And they feel so very strongly that it has created a divide in many love circles, whether it's a dear friend, a cousin, a parent, a sibling, or a spouse. And let's talk about empty chairs and limits with that, Rabbi. What do you say to people who are dealing with that sadness of that kind of empty chair?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, John. And that's a really, really good application of this topic. I was preparing my first keynote in 2017, and one of the things that I included there was this new phenomenon that had been reported in November of 2016. Some of you might remember November of 2016. There was a presidential election there with a unlikely, unexpected victor who became our next president. And what was being reported was how many families were not having Thanksgiving dinner together because they simply couldn't sit at the table with relatives who held different political beliefs. The degree of polarization had reached a pitch really unknown in memory. And I just found that so sad and so tragic, not being able to create those boundaries in our minds between our political beliefs and our personal relationships. Some of you may know that one of the prominent political speakers or pundits, James Carville, is married, and I maybe remember the name of his wife, her name escapes me, but she is a staunch conservative and he is a fiery liberal, and they've been married for decades. And they've written a book about this, and they speak about this, how you can have a loving, caring relationship with another person, even if you don't see eye to eye on every issue under the sun. I'm Mary Matlin, thank you. It's there's so many possible explanations for this, but we have trouble separating our identities from our beliefs. And also in this country, politics has risen to the level of religion. So it's no longer a question of opinion, it's a question of doctrine and dogma. And if you don't agree with me, you're a heretic, and heretics need to die. How can I share my life with a heretic? How can I invite a heretic to sit at my table? And it's not an attitude that is bringing us together as a society. It's not an attitude that's respecting the relationships that we have and friends or family. And it's just not healthy, because it doesn't allow us to discuss things in a mature way that enables us to find common ground and work together to find solutions to our problems.
And yet I understand a little bit. I have to say, I have some friends that don't vote. And that gives me more trouble than who they might vote for. As someone who's experienced in her life, and I was a child, so it's not like I had the hardship, my family did, but I grew up with the value of it. I don't understand someone not being civic minded enough or patriotic enough to vote. I don't get that. And so that kind of laxity of action is hard for me to look at people the same way. I do have one friend that I still cherish. He didn't vote. He never votes. I have to say, it's very hard for me to look at them the same way. Should it be? Maybe not, but it is for me. I'm just being honest. And we were able to have the conversation, and the rule in our family is no politics, no discussion of big money unless it's esoteric in the table. No gossip. I mean, we try and we're going to talk about fun stuff. We're going to talk about meaningful stuff. We're going to have interesting discussions, arguments about what matters, things like that, but try not take it to that level. But you know what happens, right? Water runs downhill into that crack, right?
Yeah. So I'd like to jump in and break with the long tradition we've had on the show. And I'm going to change the word for the day.
Whoa! What is the word of the day then?
So the word of the day it was supposed to be, you're going to have to wait till next week.
Okay.
I'm going to change it to the word compartmentalization.
Okay.
Because I think that's relevant to this discussion. What does that mean? It means that we can have two ideas that exist simultaneously in our minds, and they're both true, at least to us. But they don't go well together. And so we create boxes in our minds. We create compartments. I put one compartment over here, put one compartment over there. I keep them away from each other because they don't play nicely together. And I simply accept the logical inconsistency. If I believe deeply in something, and I'm with you, doctor, I believe that you have to vote. I believe it's part of our civic responsibility. I can understand people who are so frustrated with the choices and with the corruption of the system and with the sense of pointlessness. I can understand that. So I'm not going to, I don't think it's right. I'm not going to cut off my friends or my associations because they're practicing something that I think is a failure in responsibility. One, because I can understand where they're coming from, and two, because this is more important, I value other aspects of them, and I value having them in my lives. And if I'm going to cut off everybody who doesn't meet my standards, I'm going to live a pretty lonely life. And my wife probably isn't going to stick around very long either.
No, I can't imagine her putting up with that. What's interesting is the different value we give to different things that we compartmentalize. Mark Gonger is one of my favorite speakers, and he talks about men's brains and women's brains. And he says that men have a nothing box. It's right here. So women ask men, what are you thinking about? Nothing. Well, can I sit with you while you were thinking about nothing? No, because then we'd be doing something and not thinking about nothing. And he goes on and on about the values of compartmentalization and how we each have different ways. And I think he hit on the key that you're addressing, which is...
I think this is a microaggression. I don't know if you can go there.
Well, yeah, you can go there because microaggressions are all around us. Just look in the room. They're right in front of you, right? They're there. I think the idea is, how do we compartmentalize, and when is it safe to compartmentalize? If we compartmentalize too much, then pretty soon, I mean, are we okay having a Nazi as a friend? Is that too far? Can we have a rabbi as a friend if we're Catholic? What is too far? How do we define what works and what is good for us or not? So put in the chat, please. How do you make a decision about what's too much in terms of a compartmentalization that will leak over and not allow intimacy or a friendship with somebody?
While people are typing, I recommend strongly everyone go, if you haven't seen it, there's a TED Talk by a fellow named Daryl Davis. It is one of the most extraordinary TED Talks I've ever seen, or talks of any kind. He's a Black musician, and he struck up a friendship with the head of the local branch of the KKK. He started off just wanting to have a conversation because it bothered him. How can people hate me when they don't know who I am? And he arranged a meeting with this fellow, and it was very tense. And eventually they became friends. And this Black fellow, Daryl Davis, he started attending KKK rallies and was welcomed there by this fellow. And I don't know if I should say it's a spoiler alert for the end of the talk. At the end of the talk, he reaches into his closet and he pulls out the whole KKK wardrobe, because eventually what happened is this fellow resigned from the Klan. And he gave Daryl Davis his Klansman outfit, which he now has in his closet. But you think, I can't reach people. They're too far away. They're too evil. How can I endorse them? How can I legitimize them? By associating with them. Well, here's somebody who was willing to decompartmentalize. I want an extra syllable on the word of the day, right? He created a relationship that eventually transformed another person.
All right. So that goes back to what we were talking about last time, which is this issue of listening. So I have a task for you all, and Rabbi, let me know if you want to tweak the task that I have set in my mind. I want everyone to think about somebody that have a hard time listening to, because maybe the compartments clash, or they can't compartmentalize because there's too much emotion, or they just think it's wrong. Think of somebody that you are compartmentalizing to the point that you're avoiding them, and see how you might get to know them better. And I'm not asking you to call them or have a face to face or any of that on Zoom or anything. You can start a dialogue just by yourself and see if you can begin to listen differently to their point of view. So Dave Bricker has said there's a book. I put the link for the TED Talk in the chat. We're going to starting next week. We're going to put our the Rabbi and the Shrink is going on our YouTube pages, and we will put the transcript and the chats in the link below. There's also Green Book is wonderful, fictionalized account of a true story by Viggo Mortensen. So we have all sorts of interesting stuff. Okay, so Joanna says, for me, that is a question. That question is so broad. It's situational in my mind. Most of the bad people, and she has quotes on it, cover up their bad well. They seem good. They try to convince you they are good. They believe they are good. Whoa. Do you have a 10-foot pole for that one, Rabbi? That's a great one, Joanna.
Listen, there's no doubt about it. There are people that we are better off keeping our distance from. The question, and what makes it so sticky and so complicated, is have we given them the chance to demonstrate that there is good in them? Or have we rushed to judgment? I'll just quote another talk. It's by a fellow named Randy Pausch. I think it's Pousch. Fascinating talk. He spoke at his college where they had an annual talk that was called My Last Lecture. Is what would you tell people if this were the last time you're going to speak? Well, he had terminal cancer when he gave the talk, so it really was his last lecture. And one of the things he says, and was really a just magnificent speech, he said, if there's someone in whom you can find no redeeming value, wait. Literally days after I heard this talk, I was at a function. I was speaking with a woman, and her husband came up. And I had known this fellow for about 15 years and had never had one pleasant interaction with him. Not one. And I had a very nice conversation with his wife, and he walks up. And he was pleasant. He was gracious. I guess sometimes a man just needs a good woman around. But it was really surreal that after hearing this advice, if there's someone you could find no redeeming value, wait. And then immediately I found it in my own life. Sometimes, for whatever reason, we just don't see the good side of people until a situation emerges when it comes out. But back to Joanna's point, there are people that aren't. They can exhaust the chances. They can exhaust our patience, and for our own psychological, emotional well-being, and perhaps our own safety, we may have to distance ourselves. We simply have to be honest with ourselves if we've given them enough chance, or if we've rushed to that judgment.
Well, and I think sometimes we can't be with somebody because they're not safe, either because the person's not safe, or it doesn't bring out the best in us, or their habits are hard for us to resist, or we don't, there's so many reasons to not be with someone. And I still insist that one of the tenets of being a happy person, don't let the devil in the door. Do not invite people who are unsafe into your home, ever. And if someone is unsafe, ask them to leave. And I think, and do that swiftly. And then be careful. Doesn't mean you can't meet them out somewhere else if they're part of a family or whatever. But even if someone is in your inner circle and you're stuck by blood forever or by marriage, I think that it's important to remember that we have walk-away power. Dave Bricker brings up an interesting point. How unusual for Dave Bricker, right? So when someone tries to convince you that they're trustworthy, they're usually not.
Right on target, Dave.
Yeah, I think jinx, bing, bing, bing.
It's like the phrase, to be honest, what
Yeah,
were you up
no,
until now?
you want me to be honest? No, lie to me. I mean, really. I think it's interesting. But back to then the whole idea of divides and limits. I think the theme is pretty clear that limit setting is not an easy thing. It's not for people who are wimps. I think it takes a lot of courage to look at ourselves and others and to see, why am I reacting so much to this? And and why am I being so ungracious with this person? Then you can ask yourself, is it me? Is it them? Is it a combination? Are they unsafe? Do I not want to be with people like some of these people that have certain opinions? I mean, you don't have to invite them to the house ever, but maybe you keep them in your intellectual heart, if that's the case, and try and get to know them somehow and find something redeeming. It's interesting. Rabbi, we're getting down to, we have about 10 minutes left or so. Where do you want to take this idea of the limits and the divide and the empty chairs in our lives?
I think that we were talking before, and I was going to put this in there, and now I have to see if I can rewind my brain back to where that was. We we want to, well, when I was teaching, I worked for 2 years in a school where the principal wanted to be everything to everybody. And when you try to be everything to everybody, you end up being nothing to nobody. Pardon my grammar. Limits give structure to life. Children, and you can address this better than I can because you're the shrink, but children often act up because they're looking for their parents to set limits. They want to feel their world is safe. And so they test the boundaries. And the parent that allows them to test those boundaries too much is going to encourage them to continue to test them. Whereas the parent that shuts them down completely is going to encourage them to never explore, to never take chances. And therefore the intellectual honesty that we have with ourselves, recognizing that we can't resolve this contradiction. This is a theme we come back to again and again, and I think it lies at the essence of ethics. There's no app. You can't open the ethics book and find an answer to every question. In fact, you can't find answers to most questions. It's asking the questions, and it's dealing with them, and it's recognizing the ambiguity and having these kinds of discussions that enables us, empowers us, and trains us to be able to find ways of dealing with the paradoxes and the contradictions of life.
All right. So now you're making me have to be brave. There were several friends, not friends, people in my circle somehow who didn't vote. I think I now must, when I meet with this person again, and the topic always comes up about why he doesn't vote. When he brings it up, and he will, I will say to him, it makes me sad that he doesn't vote. Help me understand. And I've never said that to him because I felt he wasn't open-minded. And again, he's not a dear friend. He's part of a professional group that I do stuff with in terms of intellectual pursuits. So I only see him in a narrow context, but so I've also compartmentalized that this is not something that's my responsibility. I don't have to do anything, but maybe I don't have to be Daryl Davis and convert someone, but maybe just sharing a little bit might take us to the next level. Think about and put in the chat, put yes or no. Is there something you have in mind that you might do to reach out someone to revisit your listening, dividing, empty chair, and testing of self limits? Put a yes or a no, or a why or no. Can you think of something that you'll commit to doing in the next 90 days?
It's interesting that you mentioned this, because I just posted a short article this morning where I posed I presented the statement that Donald Trump deserves to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, and so do all those senators and congressmen who enabled him. And then I asked, write a 800 to 1,000 page essay, and that page word essay.
I'm not reading that. Okay.
And right, there's a couple of pages, an essay, an article, either supporting the statement or arguing with the statement. But the condition is, if you agree with the statement, you have to write an article criticizing it, fighting against it. And if you don't agree with the statement, you have to write an article supporting it. Because what you just said, you're going to ask this person to explain himself. And before we can begin to communicate our point of view to others, we have to convince them that we understand where they're coming from. That means we have to listen, or we have to think things, or we have to research. If I simply disagree with you because I'm so convinced I'm right, there's no way we are ever going to reach any kind of a rapport.
See, now, I think I have faith that if you and I come to that impasse, that one of us will eventually get curious and open up the ears and the brain and start some sort of internal investigation and then a discussion. Unfortunately, I don't think that that's the case for everyone in our lives. I mean, I have faith that the rabbi and I like when we disagree. He and Dave Bricker are two of my favorite people to argue with. And the whole point is I always learn something when we disagree. And often we're not really disagreeing in the same way I think we're disagreeing. It's a nuance that is exciting to me, right? But how many of us have been taught that discourse that's passionate is arguing, and that all arguing is bad and violent, when truly you can have an argument that is a clarifying statement of value and interest and thought, right? So I urge you to rethink the next time you feel like you're in a heated moment, watching someone on TV, or you're in a heated moment, ask yourself, how does it feel? What are you thinking? What are your choices? Just to practice looking at options. And I think our limits somehow aren't so in stone when we practice looking at options. And I urge you all to look at your options. And remember, you can compartmentalize, using the good rabbi's word, to keep you safe so your brain doesn't explode or your heart break too much. You can put things in a little safe place. When I used to do therapy as a clinical psychologist, I gave children this little marble, a big marble, that looked like Earth, the planet Earth. And I would tell them that they could put all of their really good or really bad thoughts or feelings or memories in that. And whenever they wanted, they could come take it out and look at it. It would be safe in there. And they could create their own world and safely deposit it. Talk about a compartmentalization. And that I was always going to be there to help them. And then we would name other grown-ups in their life or siblings that would be there. So now I ask you, who is there to help you as you struggle with some of these things?
I think that's a really good question to pose, because in business and in life, the concept of an accountability partner, someone that we can turn to and say, I want to do this in my relationships, in my family, in my business, in my community, and I want you to hold me accountable. We're going to meet in a week, in 2 weeks, in a month, and you're going to ask me, have you made progress? Have you hit the milestones that you set for yourself? And there's a lot, when you go swimming, swim with a buddy, the buddy system. It's not just in the pool. It's not just at the beach. We should take advantage of the close relationships we have, the people we trust already, to hold us accountable to do the things we know that we're supposed to do, but may not be able to get ourselves to do on our own. And I would just say that as the corollary to the word of the day, we can have the phrase of the day, which is constructive disagreement. It's a phrase I first saw by Stephen L. Carter, who's written some wonderful books called Ethics and Civility. And it's exactly what it sounds like. When we disagree, we can actually accomplish more if it's constructive, because we introduce new ideas, we hash out ideas, we look at things from different angles, different directions. And if we all agree and we're all absolutely certain that the path forward is clear, there's a very good chance that we've overlooked some flaw in our own reasoning. So embrace disagreement.
Say that again, sir.
What's that?
Say the last thing, I stepped on it.
Embrace disagreement, but keep it constructive and civil.
That's funny. My mother always used to say, thank heavens for difficult people. They show us who we are. They make us stronger. They make us have pearls. I don't have my pearls on, but they make us have pearls. It's like that little irritant in the oyster that makes the pearl. And I think that embracing disagreement is a beautiful and paradoxical intention. It's interesting. So you also told me there was a word when you're afraid of a duck looking out over you. So paradox. I mean, what was that duck one? The duck word?
Antidiphobia, I think.
That's something like that. It's a
duck is watching you.
Duck's watching you.
And all the silly geese out there are watching us. So
and we're all at some point silly geese at some level. I think it's okay that we know that. Well, we have 1 minute left, and I wanted to thank everyone for signing on and joining us. We promise that by next Tuesday, our first installment will be on our Facebook pages. Mine is Dr. Red Shoe. And Rabbi, what is your YouTube?
My YouTube, I think, is my name, Yonason Goldson.
Okay. And you don't put Rabbi there?
No, I've got enough people going after me already. I don't.
Oh, that's so funny. I can't call him by his first name. I think it's just funny. I just can't. But okay, so look at our YouTube pages. We're going to put it in Facebook and LinkedIn, and we're going to then once a week post a new video, and we'll have the Zoom has the transcripts. We'll put the transcripts and the chat if there's something interesting in the chat, so you have all the information you need. And please spread the word so people can join. So very quickly, in the chat, was it okay that we did a webinar and not have people's faces up? We did this because it's easier for video recording and to share our message. So the question is, does it work okay? Yes. Okay. Joanna, LOL. Daybreaker, meh. Joanna, okay, I think so. No, you can't see who made the comment in chat. Well, that's true. You can't see who made the comment in chat. That is a drawback. I think we're going to continue with the webinar just because it's easier to do the video recording and rendering of it.
I think we also have the issue of privacy that since people's names are posted, even if they close the cameras, not everybody may want their name posted on the recording.
Right. And unless we record locally, the names are there. Daybreaker had said you could fuzz it out, but that's a lot of time, especially since people come and go. So in order to address the issue of sharing our message privately and safely, we've opted to do this. So Malcolm says you can't see who made the comment. So from now on, then put your name first, and then your comment, unless you want your comment anonymous. I didn't know that was the case.
I don't know. Some of the chats it says who made the comments, so it might be a different.
Well, Malcolm is saying you can't see who made the comment.
Yeah, man. Malcolm, maybe you
The
don't have.
comment name. Oh, I think he's saying the image. You can't see the image.
Oh, well, yeah, there's that.
Okay. All right, that's interesting. Daybreaker said you can see as long as everyone directs their comments to the panelists and attendees. All right, and we'll make sure that we ask everyone to do that again. We did once, but not throughout. Everyone, we will see you next Tuesday at 12:30. Rabbi, as always, you're the best. Thank you,
Oh,
sir.
no, Doctor, you're the best. Who joined us are the best. So thank you for being here.
You guys take care, be safe, and ask yourself your question: who's there to help you, and who do you need to listen to in the next 90 days?
And next
Bye,
week's topic
everyone.
is what?